Hi, I'm Dave Warzel, and you're watching PHTV4 Spotlight. Today's Spotlight is on the One Book, One College program this year at Moraine Valley Community College. They're doing the book Frankenstein, which I personally like the book. I also find a very interesting choice. To take a look at the One Book, One College program, we've got Troy Swanson on my far right, the department chair of the library at Moraine Valley, and on my immediate right, Professor Laura Lawson-Collins, who is a psychology professor. And so we're going to talk about the One Book, One College program. We're also going to talk about the events that are going on during the year with it, and also how we interpret Frankenstein and how it fits into, the discussions that are going with it. And maybe to kind of get started, and for the audience as well, it's a Moraine Valley event, but it's actually open to anybody.
That's right.
We begin there.
Open to the public.
Okay. And then, so we'll talk about that program and who can participate and what activities are going on during the year. Can you give us a little bit of your backgrounds before we get started?
Sure. My name is Troy Swanson. I've been at Moraine Valley for 23 years. I'm a librarian. I also manage all of our professional staff, and I'm the coordinator for the One Book program. So I work with some of my partners in the library and our faculty to schedule events and define themes and think about how we approach the books that we select.
Okay. So I'm looking forward to that, how the books are chosen, especially this one because of its historical background and canonical classic literature like this. Interesting choice. Professor, how about you?
So I've been at Moraine Valley for about 16 years. I've been teaching for about 26. And I'm one of those faculty that Troy will often contact when he's got a new book and it's got some psychological themes that you can pull in. So that's how I contribute.
Okay, you both have some longevity here.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. All right, well, good. I'm glad you're able to bring your expertise to us today. And it's interesting because like Frankenstein as an example, and this will be my first question, but, well, maybe my second or third question, but, how it's chosen. I think we all think of the monster, Halloween and, that monster look, but this story's got actually quite a bit more than just that view of it. And so I could see where it'd make an interesting choice. Before we get to that, how about a little bit of background on what the One Book program is,
Sure.
What's involved in it, when it's going on, who is participating, that kind of thing? Yeah,
so our One Book program's been going on now for 20 years. And I've been there for all of those years, so that makes me feel old. But it's a common reading program, and libraries around the country do this. We surely did not invent it. But I do feel like we've been able to give it a nice Moraine Valley focus that connects with our faculty and our curriculum and our students, but also to the broader community. And the goal is pretty simple. You select a book, you get everybody to read that book as much as possible, and you find the key themes and ideas that book brings to the surface. And sometimes we have people that read the book and go deep into the book, and sometimes we have people that participate that have never read the book at all, and that's okay. We try to select books that have a wide-ranging theme, so it opens a lot of doors. And I think Frankenstein, as a classic, still is very relevant today and absolutely does that.
So maybe that's a good kind of segue into the thing I want to ask about how this book was chosen. And if you want to, feel free, because I was going to sneak a question here that's not on here, like what was one of, or maybe a couple of your favorite books that you've worked with in the past. But specifically, what about Frankenstein now, or really there's nothing specific to now, it could have been an any time book,
Sure. Well, and this is a unique book. So the real reason we chose Frankenstein now is since it's the 20th anniversary, it was actually our very first One Book text.
Oh, okay.
So we said, hey, let's do it again, and revisit it. And we typically don't do that. We select a range of books. Some of my favorites, since you mentioned that, one we did Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X, which had it opened so many doors of conversation and was very personal to a lot of our faculty and students. That one is definitely a highlight. Another book we did that I feel like had really kind of on the ground kind of practical applications was a book called Garbage Land by Elizabeth Royt. And it was about just, it was an environmental book, but we wanted something that wasn't global, but was really, what can I do? And the amount of garbage that we make is just unbelievable. And she explores the world of garbage, and it was a really fantastic book. But we've covered all different kinds of subjects, and when we select books, like I said before, we really think about the themes and kind of what's happening now. And so It's mostly reviews by our librarians. We take suggestions from all of our community, and we have many faculty members especially will send us books. Hey, I came across this. This is something you should think about for the one book. But we try to find that book that has a range of themes that speaks to the moment. So a few years ago we did Isaac Asimov's I, Robot to talk about artificial intelligence. We did the book 1919, which is a book of poetry about the 1919 race riots in Chicago at the moment of the George Floyd murders and debates that were happening about equity and inclusion and how our society should think about race. And so we try to find things that speak to the moment, books that are accessible, but also books, and this is maybe a little cheating, books that offer themes where not everyone has to read the book to participate. Because we know, especially with our students, with their coursework, with the regular lives, with all the things that our students do, adding an extra book isn't always realistic for everybody, and we want everybody to participate.
Yeah, and yet have the opportunity to kind of gain something from it, even if they're not well read in the
That's right.
subject. It sounds like a great way to deliver that opportunity for them, and maybe you can talk to that a little bit. I know you've had an event already. What other events are in the immediate?
Sure, we have a range of things coming up, and one thing I wanted to mention early on here, all of our events are open to the public, as I said, but also we live stream all of them to YouTube. So even if you can't come to campus, if you go to youtube.com/mvlibrary, you can find all of our events there, and you can watch them from wherever you happen to be. So if you're at work one day and you want to put that on in the background, that is fantastic. Coming up next week, we have one of our faculty members, Ann Webb. She's in our literature department. She's going to do a talk called More Human Than Human, talking about what Frankenstein the novel can teach us about empathy. That is on September 20th of next week. On September 27th, we have...
September 20th, so you're talking a couple of days on the first one.
Yes.
Right, this week.
Yeah, this week. Sorry, this week. Sorry, I said next week. Yeah, man, I'm losing my weeks. Yeah, thanks for the correction. And that's at noon this coming Wednesday. And again, if you're watching this later, a recording of that event will be available on our YouTube channel. Then next week, we have, this is actually really fun, Dr. John Murphy from Argonne National Lab is coming in to talk about artificial intelligence and the ethics around AI and what we should be thinking about. So again, not directly on Frankenstein, but definitely one of the themes of scientific ethics.
Creating any type of life form.
Yes. Once the monster's out of the box, can you get it back, right? And so we're very happy that he's volunteering his time to come and talk. A world-renowned scientist, so that's fantastic. Into October, we have a couple fun events, and one is called Monster Mash, talking about Frankenstein again, but kind of in the scope of pop culture. And then on Halloween, we have one of our faculty members, Jason King, is doing a talk about the universal monsters. So we'll talk about Frankenstein, but also Dracula and Wolfman and the Mummy. And
I'm getting all those images, the Universal Studio,
That's right. Yeah. So you see, we try to really change it up. So some will be very academic kinds of talks, and some will be a little bit more fun. And I mean, they're all fun, but
more toward the spectrum of entertainment versus hard education. I get it. No, it sounds like there's a good wide variety of experiences that people can have with this. All right, so maybe this is the transition now into that actual book. And you spoke to, you mentioned how it speaks to a time period. And obviously the book, Mary Shelley, I know she wrote it, published prior, but published in 1818, I believe, right? So we're going back quite a bit here, yet it still works, it's still, I believe, taught in many high schools around the country, and obviously shows up in college campuses. A very well-known story, probably not as read as it is just known, right? But let's talk about that. Like, what's going on in this book? In what ways it make it especially relevant to readers or applicable to issues today?
So I think that there are quite a few themes from the book that make it applicable to today, but one of the ones that stands out the most would be the concept of the other, as you mentioned before. So I think that in the book, oftentimes people have a stereotype that it's the monster who is, the evil, dark creature, and that, that's going to be the other of the book. But how does he become other? And, a lot of that is from Dr. Frankenstein himself, creating something that is the other, that everybody is afraid of and abhors. And that, I think, is very relevant to today, where we have a lot of practice with othering people, you know, in our lives, in our communities, online.
I'm so sure there is a tribal element to how we function.
Yes.
Right? I mean, we like to be similar. We like to know. We like to have a connection, so that am I on your side or am I like you? That, you know, we can function together like that. It is interesting to note. I hope it shouldn't be a spoiler, but you know, we talk about the Frankenstein monster. But I mean, as an English teacher, I'd love to let the student write the essay. Well, the monster's not the monster. Maybe the doctor is the monster here, right?
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that he does tap into that very basic human instinct of us versus them, as you were talking about. You know, if you picture us 50,000 years ago, what would have kept us safe would have been, you know, we were living in small groups and, you know, 40 to 50 people. We would have been relying on one another within our group. If we encounter someone else who's not a part of our group, it would have been really important to be able to identify they are other, they are not us. We need to reserve our resources for us. So I do think that there is an evolutionary reason why we have this very strong us versus them. And we have a lot of evidence for that today as well, that is a deeply ingrained part of being human. When you look at fMRIs, for instance, you can see that people process information differently if it's coming from someone you consider to be us versus someone you consider to be them. For us, we process a lot with our prefrontal cortex. We're weighing what they're saying. We're really processing and giving them back a rational response. When it's someone who we consider to be them, we skip over the prefrontal cortex. We use a lot of the deeper structures of the brain and the limbic system, or these structures called the amygdala, that signal to us when we feel threatened. And a lot of those are what are active when someone from them, whatever them is speaking. So we're not fully processing what we're saying.
As I say,
What they're saying.
as you're saying this, I'm thinking about how people take in information today, whether, you know, the TV they watch, the news they watch, or the internet, where they pull the information off the internet. You could certainly see where there's a comfort thing in knowing that this is like my team, right, or my tribe, or my group, and so I'm much more likely to accept or embrace that information as compared to they're outside my tribe. I'm going to look at it very skeptically. They become the other. That's what you're.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you've talked about this issue, I'm assuming this has come up a little bit in some of the programming or events. What's the audience reaction? How do they take this or respond to it?
You know, in our talk, I saw a lot of nodding. I saw a lot of people connecting to it. And, you know, we also talked a bit in our last talk about cancel culture as well. And, you know, creating these groups of others. I think I saw a lot of people connecting to that as well.
Maybe, you know, can we talk a little bit about the concept of creating other? In this case, you know, Dr. Frankenstein is trying to do something for science that, well, maybe morally very, very, you know, questionable, but he's trying to advance science and in some ways, you know, create something, kind of like your reference to AI. I mean, creating something, but then once it's out of the bag, I don't know if this is something we should have created. In the process of creating others, how does that kind of like parallel to today, the others that are created today? Do you know what I mean? In the process, that obviously is not what Dr. Frankenstein is doing, but is ultimately the same end, right?
Yeah, so I think that we can create others out of a lot of different groups. There's a wide variety of ways that we can create other in our lives. And we can jump from definition to definition. You know, at one point, other in your day may be Packers fans versus Bears fans. You know, and if that is the mindset that you're in and that's a category that you're focused on, you're going to behave with Packers fans as you do with just other. But later in the day, you might have a different group that is other. You know, if you are, it depends on what categories are in the front of your mind, are salient to you at the time. But I mean, honestly, it can be any group. It can be people from Illinois versus people from Wisconsin. It can be men versus women. It can be young people or old people. And we can also create categories as well, and I think people do that a lot as well.
Well, and I was just going to say, one thing that I think really that mad scientist kind of theme that Frankenstein really invented, that trope that has carried through Western literature for sure. Frankenstein, the scientist, Frankenstein, the monster is the monster and Frankenstein's the scientist. We always get those kind of mixed up in pop culture. But it really asks you to think about when do we bring ethics to the table in our creations. And when he was making the monster in the novel, there were no ethics involved. He just wanted to see if he could do this thing, not thinking about any repercussions, not thinking about any responsibility. And I think that conversation really connects into so many things today. And I was listening to a recent podcast comparing the conversations happening now around AI versus conversations that didn't happen around social media maybe 10 years ago, right? So an invention of this technology that's unleashed on society that at least played part of a role in the polarization that we see across America and probably the world. Very little conversations about ethics, where now as these AI companies are really exploding, I mean, just this week there were hearings in Washington that Senator Chuck Schumer organized with leaders of these companies saying, how do we do this right so we don't let once the genie's out of the bottle, it doesn't come back, right? And so, again, Frankenstein is a metaphor for the mad scientist with his creation and unleashing the creation and then not taking responsibility for that creation. And so it really connects in so many ways.
Timely issue. As you're saying, I'm thinking of like the movie Oppenheimer, that, and probably human history is just a series of, we can do it, we can create it, but oftentimes the question doesn't come afterwards until like, maybe we shouldn't have done that, or should we have done that, or how should we have managed it, or put a system in place to, monitor it somehow, or, I don't know if you can ever really control it. Now, as you're saying that, I kind of want to, I want to work two ideas. One is, I don't know that other is always a negative thing. I mean, there is an important identity, and I think it partly in our evolutionary survival too, and being aware of who we are and what's outside us. So the concept of it being a negative or a positive or a neutral, and then the other thing is, in the case of, let's say it is a negative, in the case of the Frankenstein monster or some of the modern parallels we see in society today, how do we break that down? And does the book offer any roadmap or suggestions on how we can make other, undo the other, so that, I don't know that the monster Frankenstein will ever get welcomed into that civilization, but how do you get him to not be perceived the way they do, just like maybe some of the parallel problems we have today?
Yeah, so I think empathy, empathy, is I think a key, and thinking about things from that other person's perspective. It's very difficult to think of another person as other in a negative way, and also have empathy for that person's plight. And I think we see that at the end of the book, right?
I think there's a couple scenes in the book that you begin to realize you start to feel some of that sympathy or empathy for the monster. You don't feel for the doctor. I personally, by the end of the book, I'm like, what have you done here?
Right.
Yeah. Well, and
how do you develop that empathy, though? And I think you're right, in the book they do. How about in our world, how do you do that? Where, to me, that person's an other, and I'm sorry, I'm just not going to feel it for you.
Yeah. So I think, again, really trying to think about what that person is going through, thinking about what would it be like to be in that person's shoes, trying to imagine what life would be like. It's very difficult to hold, again, really angry emotions against someone who you are feeling what they're feeling.
Right. And I think it's like the old saying, we all share more in common than we have different. And I know Laura and I we talk about all kinds of psychological theories. I'm excited to steal her thoughts. We talked about some of the groups where people of differing views will get together and have a cup of coffee. So it's easy to see the other when you're interacting on like Facebook or something and to go after people there. But when you actually sit down one-on-one and let's actually talk and you get to some of that nuance, you recognize, oh, I understand you better. Maybe we don't agree, but I recognize kind of where you're coming from.
Sure. So. Finding what you have in common with another person. I know this is a bit off topic, but one of my areas that I'm really interested in is conspiracy theories. And if you're trying to talk to, say, a family member who believes in a conspiracy theory, and you want to maybe help them work their way out, especially if there are negative consequences connected to it, really the best approach is to start with what do you have in common? Let's start with where are our shared beliefs? Because that helps to bring you into the same group. You want the other person to see you as us, not as them.
Right.
Because when you see the other person as us, then you can have more of a conversation with that person, as opposed to them. You tend to shut down.
Right. Now, and I personally, I agree with you that the challenge that is immediately coming up in my mind, like in the case of the book with the monster, is when people see him,
Right.
he's always going to be. I am not that person. I don't have a shared thing with him. What's my commonality? And so somehow you have to break down that barrier. In that respect, I don't think the book offers any clue as to. The book is a tragic ending.
Right.
Well, and the thing I think that's really brilliant about the book, and there's so many things that are brilliant about the book, is that it does take you on a journey. And early on, you're very sympathetic to the scientist.
Right.
And he achieves his great work, and you are happy for him. And then immediately it kind of turns. And even with the monster, then as the monster almost goes through a process of self-discovery, and the monster is almost the most human character, ironically, right, in the book. And as the monster recognizes the world and understands family, but then understands what he's missing.
Right, what he can't
have,
or he's not with
and
them.
to me, the real tragedy of the book is the monster asks Dr. Frankenstein for a wife, basically, that I don't want to be alone anymore. And Frankenstein refuses. And then the monster's faced with a choice. How do I react in that? And unfortunately, to me, the real tragic term is the monster doesn't react with his own empathy, but decides to take it out and get revenge. And then that's where the book spirals into kind of the tragic ending that it gets to. Spoiler alert, I guess, right? But that it takes you down these paths where you're sympathetic, and then they each make their own bad choices together.
And that's an excellent scene to point to, because I think it kind of highlights the complexity in the story, that nobody is ever pure good or pure bad, or how does a person end up the way they end up? Why am I this person, or why do I feel that way? As you're talking, I'm thinking about the scene early in the book when the monster first comes alive, and the Dr. Frankenstein, spoiler alert, has an epiphany where he's kind of horrified by what he's done. He runs away, he abandons the monster, and he stays out, I think, most of that night. And it's like maybe he should have had a thought about this a little bit sooner.
Right.
And now that you've created this thing, what are you going to do to help it not be another?
Right.
Which is definitely not where he's headed at that moment. It sounds like like the potential to, with the activities you're talking about, a tremendous book to explore. And I think it's an interesting way to apply it to contemporary issues. Looking at this story, which is so clearly about a monster, but maybe not. Maybe it's about much more than that.
It's about the monstrous part of us.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And it speaks to the real power of literature and what Mary Shelley did when she wrote this book, that it's a 200-year-old book. And like you said, it's still pretty readable. I mean, there's some book, most 200-year-old books, you really need to go to grad school and get some help. But this is still fairly accessible, and it's read all over. And it's just, it's one of those stories that even if you haven't read the book, you kind of know the story, and that kind of speaks to its own success. So,
and I think you've both spoken to it, but I'd like you to both kind of comment on it one more time as we kind of, get towards wrapping this up. I guess, a couple things. One is, what do you hope that readers or participants who attend some of your events, what do they gain from it? What type of experience do you hope they have, so that, what ideas that, they walk away with it from?
I hope that people walk away enriched. I mean, that's what I feel like books do. They help to enrich your lives, and they help to open the doors to new ways of thinking about the people around you, and about events in your life and your own life. So I hope that people walk away with new perspectives, new understandings, new ideas, new connections, and hopefully, making a connection to others too in the community. Hopefully, seeing that I am a part of a community. And again, going back to the themes from the book, that is a theme from the book. That if you are missing that, you are going to be miserable. And I think we've all been missing that to some degree over the last few years.
Right.
So I do think that these events can be really beneficial, knowing that you have a connection to the community.
Yeah, maybe the person, and maybe a monster is hyperbolic, but the person who you see as other or monster-like maybe is not.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do want to give you a chance to comment on that too, like other themes that might come up in other events or activities, but
yeah, I mean, I think Laura really captured it. I mean, I think conversations about ethics and our responsibilities to each other and to as we move forward in society and as new technologies emerge, I think Frankenstein is it is a commentary always about what is the role and how do we move forward. And just as a librarian, so many, when you think of libraries, you often think about books. And, that's great. Books are so important to how we share and how we think. But for us, the people that work in libraries, to me, it's always about the ideas. And the reason we have the books is because that's where most of the best ideas we've captured as a society. And we always want people to be able to come, as far as like talk about community, our library, we like to think of, is that intellectual community space that anyone can come into. And our library is open to everyone that's in our district. Anyone can come in. May not know this, little quick commercial. Anyone that lives in Moraine Valley's district can check out books from us. So we'd be happy to have anyone come and join us, students or otherwise. And I always think you never know what kind of idea you're going to stumble onto next when you walk into the library. And maybe it's that new book you didn't know, and maybe it's one of our great faculty members who's doing an event that you didn't realize was going on, and maybe it's just connecting to our YouTube channel and listening in when you have free time. So.
I was going to say some great opportunities. Definitely would encourage people, go to Moraine Valley Community College, go to the library, look for the books, look for the programming, the activities. Become part of that conversation.
That's right.
Become part of, in this case, specifically here, becoming aware of the other and how to deal with that. Thank you both very much. Is there anything else you want to say about the program before we wrap this up? I know we've covered a lot of ground here, and I'm imagining there's other themes that you'll explore during the year.
Right, all kinds of things. We have our set of events for the fall. We kind of wrap up around November, because once you get to Thanksgiving and then holidays, everyone's getting into finals week and busy. But then we haven't announced it yet, but we will be announcing a slate of events starting in the spring semester, so around February, March, April. So check out what we have this fall, and also feel free to come back in the new year.
And that'll carry through almost to the end of the school year. Probably
yes, till graduation in May. Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
All right. Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Department Chair,
thank
you very much. No, this is great. I'm really excited about this. Makes me want to revisit the book, and hopefully I'll get to check them out on YouTube. If you can't make the program, there's other ways. Hopefully you get a chance to participate.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Dave Wurzel, and you've been watching PHTV4 Spotlight. Today's Spotlight has been on the One Book, One College program at Moraine Valley Community College, doing Frankenstein this year. Thank you for watching.